My first year of seminary at Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York, I took an optional weekend course taught by a local female minister of a larger UCC church in the city. The title of this course was The Nitty-Gritty of Parish Life. So for this one weekend, I set aside the more heady stuff. I put down my systematic theology and Old Testament and church history books, and I submerged myself for 16 whole hours in the very practical aspects of pastoring a church. It was intellectually stimulating things like running a capital campaign, managing staff, dealing with leaky roofs, and trying to heat a huge building. Mostly I took this class because I knew that this woman pastor with 30 years of experience, she was known for having deep wisdom, a well-harnessed power, and a deep love, a palpable love that came out in this sort of no-nonsense honesty kind of way. So while she was talking about all of these brick and mortar realities of leading a church, she said something, and I don't honestly remember what the context was. I think it might have been in response to a question, but she said this one line that I have never forgotten. She didn't expand on it, she didn't elaborate, she simply said this: your ability to have authority is proportional to your ability to have self-control. Now, I was stopped in my tracks, to be honest. I wrote it down in my notebook with big question marks in the margins. Of course, I knew that authority was important and that ministerial authority is its own kind of thing. It's very important. It's something that ministers have to grow into, and you step into gradually as you live into your calling. You simply had to have it. But to so unilaterally equate it with self-control just seemed odd to me, because self-control was the language that I had grown up with, and it honestly felt more oppressive than empowering. My experience with how self-control had been used, or how it had been held up as a virtue, felt more like trying to be controlled from the outside in. I associated self-control with being disempowered, with unhealthy hang-ups and restrictions. And to be honest, in my mind, I had conflated self-control with self-punishment. What I came to understand over time is that there is a big difference between imposed self-control that is more about oppression than agency, and inwardly balanced self-control. Because I had witnessed a lot of forms of this outwardly imposed kind of self-control, and I had witnessed the damage that it had done. I saw the toll that the held-up virtue of self-control had taken on family and friends who developed secret eating disorders due to restricted eating, but outwardly were praised for their discipline. Or sometimes these same folks who abused themselves with overexercise if they felt they had done something wrong. I observed how workaholism had led to the breakdown of marriages and families, all in the name of self-discipline and hard work. I had seen adolescents engage in self-harm as ways to try to learn more self-control. What had been praised in culture or by culture as self-control, to me, seemed to be more self-destruction. It seemed more disempowering rather than empowering. But hearing my teacher for the weekend say these words, your ability to have authority is proportional to your ability to have self-control. Hearing her say this opened this door in my mind that I obviously had to walk through. Clearly, the complete lack of restraint is just as destructive as a misguided notion of self-control. Doing whatever one wants, regardless of the consequences for self or others, can be devastating. Just as doing nothing that one wants can also be devastating for self and others. In both of our passages today, self-control is named as part of the Christian life, but it's not named as a standalone goal. you'll notice that it's always part of a larger group of things like kindness, generosity, and love. And in 2 Timothy, self-control is put into this kind of trinity-like triangle of qualities that the text tells us that we are all given by the Spirit of God, which is power, love, and then self-control. The version of self-control that I had developed such an aversion to was kind of a standalone, warped beacon. It had no balance. But if we sit in the words of 2 Timothy, we see that we are given here a recipe for a fierce and a fearless spirit. God did not give us a spirit of fear. Some translations say it this way: God did not give us a spirit of timidity. Our true spirit that we have been given is an empowered spirit which is comprised of three things: power, love, and self-control. It is not self-control by itself. It is not love by itself. It is not power by itself, but it is all of them that together create this kind of three-legged stool. Now, we don't have to look too far into the public sphere for examples of those who might say have abundant power and perhaps as well as love, but really lack self-control. Fill in the blank here with a number of politicians or religious leaders. My guess is you can also likely think of people who you know who seem to have mastered self-control and power, but they really struggle to give or receive love. And maybe you know folks who exceed in love, but they struggle with self-control and therefore have limited power. They love everyone and everything, but sometimes the details of their lives become so overwhelming because they're often neglected in their exuberance to love, and so their power is diffused. And I can't help but wonder, as I hold you, my beloved congregation, in my heart, I can't help but wonder how many of you also have a complicated relationship with self-control. How deeply has New England Puritanism ingrained itself in you in ways that it tells you you only deserve what you earn. You only deserve what you create, and therefore you better hone your self-control and self-discipline above all else. I just wonder if that's something that rattles around in your mind and in your heart. Wherever you are with that, I simply invite you to consider the other fruits of the Spirit and the balance that they give us. I invite you to consider the other two legs standing alongside self-control that stabilize the stool of fearlessness, which are power and love. And I invite you to consider the truth and the resilience of grace. Real growth and maturity, real peace, real courage is ours for the growing. It's right there. God has already given us a spirit that is not afraid, but is full of power and love and in balance, self-control. And so, friends, through the lens of this truth, the lens of this grace, I invite you, just in your heart, to gently assess, how is your relationship with these three things? What's it like? Notice for a minute, if you will, where do you need to grow? Is it in power, fully owning who you are? Is it in love, opening up your heart more? Or is it in self-control? And in a similar way, take a moment to acknowledge what you are already strong in. Is it in power? Is it in love? Or is it in self-control? Friends, whatever your answer is to these questions, in your hands, each and every one of you holds a gift. It's a gift, and the only response to this gift is either to accept it or to reject it, and it is quite simply the gift of grace. And this gift doesn't only make okay where you have been in the eyes of God, but it also empowers you to grow more and more fully into who you really are. The gift of grace that you hold in your hands invites you to allow these three things, power and love and self-control, to grow together in your life. It allows them to find integrity with one another and to free you at last from any places where fear might still linger. To free you at last, by the grace of God, to even be more of your God-given self for this good world. I have to say, this is the only kind of authority that I am interested in. It's the only kind of authority that the church can have with any kind of integrity. It's not an authority that's fear-based or top-down or uses power over, but one that simply comes naturally from following this recipe that leads to a lack of timidity, which is courage. Cultivating this three-legged stool: power, love, self-control. Friends, if what we say in our vision statement is true, if we want to change the world through love, compassion, and courage, then it is these very things that we are invited to become. May it be so. Amen.